Good afternoon, everybody. It's Dr. Lisa. A lot of you know me as Dr. Lisa on the street. I'm the founder of Grapevine Health, and I'm so excited today. We have a guest with us, Dr. David Diemert from GW. And the reason we're talking to Dr. Diemert is because there's a lot of confusion about the coronavirus vaccine. So before we jump into the questions, and I know there have been a lot of questions on Facebook and other social media outlets for you, Dr. Diemert. But can you just introduce yourself and tell people, we have so many experts now on social media and the news talking about the vaccine, and it's creating a lot of confusion. So who are you, and why should people believe anything you have to say about the vaccine?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for having me on. So I'm David Diemert. I'm an infectious disease physician. I'm a professor here at the School of Medicine and Health Sciences at George Washington University in DC. I have been working on the clinical development of new vaccines for about 20 years now. I've done a lot of phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials for different vaccines. I've mainly worked on vaccines for tropical infections. I started with malaria. I've worked on other parasitic infections internationally, and most recently Zika and HIV. So I've kind of worked on doing clinical trials of all vaccines for all of those different infections.
Great. So that's great experience. Definitely have established your credibility in this space. So why don't we first just start by explaining a few things for people who might be confused about vaccines. And the reason I think this is important is because when I'm out in the community, I hear a lot of people saying things to me like, I don't want a vaccine because when they give it to you, it gives you the disease. The most common one they're referring to is the flu vaccine. I've heard countless people, and you probably have too, say, oh, I don't want the flu vaccine because every time I get the flu vaccine, I get the flu. And I also think people have a misunderstanding about what's actually in the vaccine. So can you first just tell people what are vaccines and what's in a vaccine?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is there are lots of different vaccines, even for COVID-19. There's not one vaccine that's being developed. There's literally hundreds of different ones. And there are lots of different kind of constructs or different types of vaccines that are being developed. It's hard to categorize them all together because they're different. Each one is different. And they use different methods for making them, and there's different ingredients that are in each one of them. So, and the other point I would make is that most vaccines have some side effects. That's not necessarily causing the disease. So, for example, I hear that same thing all the time with flu vaccine too. Oh, I got flu after I got the vaccine. That's actually impossible. You can have side effects that maybe make you think that you have the flu, but it's not actually the flu, because you produce an immune response, an inflammatory response that might involve having soreness, fever, feeling fatigued for a few days. People might think that's the flu, but it's actually not. It's just a reaction to the vaccine, because what's in that vaccine, the influenza vaccine, is actually killed virus. It's dead. It's impossible to come back to life. The vaccine we're going to test here at GW, which is the first phase 3 trial of a COVID vaccine in the US, is the Moderna vaccine. It's an mRNA vaccine. So it actually just contains a little piece of virus that it's impossible to get the infection from the actual vaccine. There's no way it could happen because it's just a little snippet of the virus that's synthesized in the lab.
But so when you say synthesized in the lab, you mean they created it in the lab based on the whole piece of virus? So are you saying a person can't get infected from just a piece of the virus, that you have to be exposed to the whole virus before you can get sick?
That is exactly correct. So I use this analogy. So the vaccine, the mRNA vaccine, the Moderna vaccine, it's kind of like giving a chef in the kitchen yeast and telling him to make a cake without giving him any of the other ingredients. So it's impossible for him to all of a sudden, or her, to make a cake of that. So that's what we're doing. We're just giving one ingredient of something, so it's impossible to make the whole virus from that.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about that to connect the dots for people. And I love that metaphor. I can't make a cake if I don't have all the ingredients. So in this case, since you're not giving me the whole virus, I can't get sick. What's happening? You mentioned when you get a vaccine, you might have inflammation in your body or things that are swelling up. But what are these symptoms from? Because I think that's one of the biggest reasons people get concerned. They think the response they're getting is the actual flu in the case of flu vaccine. So what's actually happening?
So most vaccines are injected into your arm. So like flu vaccine and the vaccine we're going to test is an intramuscular injection. So it's, injected into the muscle of your arm right here. So what happens right there is the immune system recognizes that as something that's not supposed to be there. We say it's like foreign material that's in your body. So our bodies are designed to fight off things that aren't supposed to be there. That's what our immune system is all about. So there's a reaction that happens at the site where the injection is given. That's your normal response for the body, but it's also the response we want, because we want there to be an immune reaction. We want there to be an inflammatory response, so that an immune response is made to what we've injected that's then going to protect people with antibodies, which is part of the immune response, if they eventually get exposed to the virus that's circulating in the community. So that I always think that if someone has a reaction like soreness, tenderness at the site of the injection, maybe feeling fatigue for a few days, sore muscles and achiness for a day or so, that actually means that the vaccine is working, because it's doing what we want it to do. We want it to make a strong response so that you're left with a state of your immune system that's then going to protect you.
Yeah, I like to tell people it's kind of like a dress rehearsal. So we're showing the body the virus so that when the real thing is upon you, it's able to fight it off because it's seen it before. So
that's
yeah,
a great analogy.
Yeah. So before we talk specifically about the coronavirus vaccine, just a couple other things just about vaccine trials and clinical trials in general. So specific to vaccines, there's a question, we got a question on Facebook about what is the difference between the different kinds of vaccines, what you're actually giving to people? Because these terms we hear, killed vaccines versus inactivated versus live, what do people need to know about those? And should they be concerned if it's a live vaccine? What does that mean?
Right. Well, even within the live vaccine category, there's different types of live vaccines. But in general, we divide vaccine categories into live viral vaccines. So for example, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, that will be the second phase 3 trial to start in the US, that is a live viral vaccine. Another type is inactivated or killed. Those are actually, it can be the same thing. Where you say grow up a virus in a lab and then kill it and use that to inject as the vaccine. That's the injected influenza vaccine, flu shot, for example. And then there are subunit vaccines, which are just little parts of say the virus, which is the mRNA vaccine or recombinant protein vaccine. Those are all subunit vaccines. Mm-hmm. The live vaccines, whether you should be more concerned about those, I think depends on what kind of live vaccine it is. So for example, there is some vaccines being developed in China that are actually actual coronavirus virus that is grown up in a lab and then attenuated in some way. And then that's used as the vaccine. There's other ones that use a different kind of virus that's usually called an adenovirus as kind of like as a scaffold. And then you insert genes for like the SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 proteins into that that modified adenovirus. But it's alive. It can't replicate in the body, but it's alive, and that's injected. I don't think we know enough yet to know if one is better than the other or one is safer than the other. That's why we're doing these trials, is to figure that out.
Mm-hmm. So related to trials, the final question, the final general question I have about vaccine trials is, what are these different phases people are talking about? Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. What happens in each phase?
Right. So normally it progresses sequentially, phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3. And then if it looks like it's a vaccine that's effective and safe, that's when you apply for licensure to the FDA to be able to market it, at least in this country. So phase 1 are usually small, dozens of people, usually less than 100, usually less than 50. A healthy volunteer for vaccine trials, they're healthy volunteers, usually adults, are the first to get tested, and that's really to look at safety. So you can test starting from a low dose. You might go to higher doses sequentially to see if there's any bad side effects that might preclude further development. Phase 2, you're looking at higher numbers of people, usually in the hundreds. And you're looking at safety again. That's the primary endpoint you're looking at, primary goal you're looking at. But you're also looking at the immune response, because you want to make sure that there's kind of a consistent, high, good immune response that you think is going to protect people if they're exposed to the particular organism. And then last, if everything looks okay from the phase 2 and phase 3, is what we call a pivotal phase 3 efficacy trial for vaccines. And that usually
that's
involves,
a lot of big words.
Sorry, efficacy means does it work? So phase 3 is the final phase for before you apply to the FDA to license to be able to market your product. But you're looking again at safety, but what we call efficacy, and that just means, does it really work? Does it prevent the disease or the infection that you're looking at?
Yeah, thanks. And we hear a lot about the FDA during this pandemic. I think people who've never thought about the FDA now are really wondering, like, what is the FDA really doing? What's their responsibility? So why is the FDA associated with these trials?
Because they're the government agency, they're the legal agency that has to look at all of the safety data, all of the disease data, and to see if it works and is safe. That's the final kind of arbiter, the final decider of whether or not the vaccine can move forward and get approved. Mm-hmm. So they're really very important, and they're involved from an early stage, even before the trials start, in giving feedback and having to approve the design, how the studies are actually going to be conducted, what kind of testing is going to be done, how many people should be in the trials. So they, for example, for the vaccine trial that I'm going to do, they've been very involved in working with the NIH and working with the company, Moderna, to design the study.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, we used an acronym. That's the Food and Drug Administration, and for anybody who's wondering. So now on to the coronavirus. Lots of questions from people about this. And the first one is related to the name of this trial, Warp Speed. And I think the concern is when you hear a name like that, corners are being cut. This is not going to be a safe, and these are things I've heard talking to people in the community. They don't want to be first because they're cutting corners with this vaccine, and why is it going so fast? Can you please help people understand? First of all, Warp Speed is a terrible name for any kind of research study. Let's just acknowledge that. But why is it going so fast? What's happening? Can you help people? Because I think there's a lot of confusion and discomfort around the notion that this vaccine trial is going faster than any in history.
Right. And I have heard the same thing, and I think it's a very valid concern. So I would just point out that warp speed is actually not the name of the trial that we're doing. It's the name of the effort of the US government, not just for vaccine development,
Oh,
but for developing vaccines, developing treatments to treat people who actually are infected, and also for developing new tests to see if people actually have the infection. So it's much more than just the vaccine effort. The
that's really
vaccine
great information for people to know, because I think this term warp speed has specifically been assigned to the vaccine trial. So that's excellent information. So it's just an umbrella term for all the science and the diagnostics, the research we were doing during the pandemic.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And the vaccine effort that's kind of being funded through funds from the U.S. government that are coming from this war. I agree. I didn't pick the name, but that the vaccine effort has really been driven by the NIH. So and the part of the NIH that Dr. Fauci runs or directs, and it's called the Coronavirus Prevention Network, that's been set up to do a series of phase 3 trials. And we're just doing the first one. We might do actually additional ones after that. Initially, they've chosen 5 different vaccines to do large phase 3 trials for. We're participating as a site in the first one. And I completely understand why people might be nervous or anxious about the speed. And it's a balance between what's happening to the country and to the world in terms of this pandemic, and how much not only disease, mortality, people dying as a result of the virus. We want to put an end to that, but we also want to be able to go to work, interact with people again, and not be worried about every interaction we have might lead to someone getting sick and potentially even dying. So it's a balance between what's going on with the pandemic and doing something that we know is still going to be safe and works. So I think the best way I can describe the way that the vaccine development is moving is it's being layered and staggered instead of being done in sequence or being done one after the other. So instead of waiting till the phase 1 is all finished and all the data is looked at in a leisurely manner, submitted to the FDA, the phase 2 started after everyone had been vaccinated in the phase 1, and we had an initial look at the safety and the immune response. They started the phase 2, and we were starting the phase 3 before the final data is ready for the phase 2. We have initial data, which looks good, but we've decided the planning to start the phase 3 happened before we had any results from the phase 2. So everything is being very tightly staggered, with the usual safety checks happening and the same number of people being in the trials than they if it weren't moving at this pace. But it's all being staggered much more than we usually would do that.
When you say you have early data, what is that? What data are you looking at?
So the 2 pieces of the data you look at for a phase 1 are safety. So you look at all of the side effects that have been recorded in the people who got the vaccine. Mm-hmm. And the second one, you look at the immune response. And the thing we usually look at is the level of antibodies in the blood. Because
the antibodies are the component of the immune system that are protecting you from the infection.
That's what we think. We have to prove that. We had to prove that through the phase 3 trial.
Are you able to say anything about side effects you're seeing so far, or no?
Yes, sure. So the phase 1 trial was already published. It's anyone can look at it in the New England Journal of Medicine in the middle of July. It came out. And the phase 2 data hopefully is also going to be published soon. But we've seen all of the investigators who are doing this trial have seen that data. I would say that the safety looks very good. There are side effects. People do get soreness and tenderness, some redness in some cases at the site where the injection was given. That doesn't last very long, usually a day or 2. People feel tired, and an achy, kind of the same thing I was describing for the flu shot. People can
Mm-hmm.
have similar reactions. But nothing more serious than that has been recorded. And in the phase 3 trial we're doing, there's already been more than 6,000 people who have been vaccinated. And again, no serious reactions have occurred.
But again, we want those reactions because it suggests the body is responding and ramping up in case the person encounters the virus, right?
Right. We don't want it to be too bad so that people feel really terrible.
Right.
And, there could be potential side effects from any vaccine that are, we use the term serious that actually has a meaning in clinical trials to mean something that's really bad that you want to avoid. So that we haven't seen that with the vaccine to date.
Yeah.
Like, for example, someone could potentially have a really bad allergic reaction, like you might get with someone who has a bad peanut allergy. So we're being very careful to watch for things like that.
Mm-hmm. So just a little bit more, though, on the speed of the trial. There have been lots of comments and experts online talking about these vaccine trials. But last week I heard an expert, someone who's well known in the vaccine world, say that phase 2, you went through the different phases of the trials, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And this expert said phase 2 is being skipped, and that's why it's going so quickly. But is that your experience, or what? How do you respond to that?
No, that it wasn't skipped, and I listened to the same clip too, and I don't really understand why he said that, because at least for the trial, the vaccine I'm working on, the Moderna vaccine, there is a phase 2 trial. It started enrolling people, vaccinating at the end of May, and they completed enrollment of 600 people in the middle of June, and we already know the initial data. So I think what he meant was that we're not waiting the usual year or two for the end of that study before starting the phase 3 trial. And we didn't wait till the end of the phase 2 before planning and getting everything set up to start vaccinating in the phase 3. But it was definitely not skipped. But as I said before, just staggered instead of doing them in sequence, one after the other.
Okay. And I just want to pause and thank anybody who's watching this live on YouTube. If you have questions and that we haven't covered or you want to ensure we cover, please make sure you leave a comment so that we can ask Dr. Diemert your question. So we have a set of questions about safety in children. What about people with chronic health conditions? And are there some people who should be in the trial first versus later after you have more information? So are there any concerns or considerations for people around who should be in the trial?
Right. So the first question I can answer right off the bat is about the children. So they have not been in any of the trials for any of the vaccines that I've seen, I think. Definitely not for the Moderna vaccine. There have been no children under the age of 18 who have been part of the studies, and they're not part of the phase 3 trial either. We could go into the reasons for that, but so I can't say anything.
I think someone's asking a question about that. She wants to know, will efficacy data when will it be available for kids?
We will not have that data until, I would say, after next year at the earliest, because we're not going to have efficacy data for adults until the end of this year, early next year at the earliest. And they're not even planning yet to do trials in kids. And I think the main reason for that is because we know that kids are not really affected by this virus in terms of getting severe disease. There are cases of really rare cases of severe disease in kids, but those are extremely rare.
Okay.
So the focus is really on adults for now.
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. You were answering the question about whether or not certain groups like elderly or people with compromised immune systems, I think pregnant women was also one of the, should they avoid being in the trial?
Sure.
Or getting
so,
vaccinated for that matter?
So in the phase 1 and 2 trials, only healthy people who did not have any other illnesses were tested. But for the phase 3 trial, we are including people who have what we call comorbidities or other illnesses. So having heart disease, having lung disease, having kidney disease, having diabetes, you can still be in the trial. And actually, we're encouraging people who have those diseases to be in the phase 3 trial because we know that they're more at risk of getting severe disease. So we definitely want to make sure that they're in the phase 3 trial so that we can show that it's safe in that people who have other diseases, and it works, it's effective. The people who are not are going to be included in this phase 3 trial are those who have an immune condition that means they're immunosuppressed, so their immune system doesn't work really well for 2 reasons. One is that there's a potential it might not be as safe in those people, but also because they won't always develop an immune response, which is what we need to have an effective vaccine. People who have HIV or living with HIV can be in the trial if they're on appropriate therapy, antiretroviral therapy. And then pregnant women are not included in this initial phase 3 trial, and that's always a concern about potential effects on a developing baby and fetus. And then other people who can't be in the study are people who have already had COVID infection. But otherwise, it's pretty much open to everyone else, including people who have other illnesses.
And can you explain why people who've already had COVID should not be in a vaccine study?
Sure. And that is because we still don't know if having had the infection means that you're immune. So it wouldn't make sense to include people who already are immune in a vaccine trial that you're trying to look at to see if the vaccine works, because we wouldn't be able to know if it was the vaccine that caused them to be protected or their prior infection. So it really would mess up your analysis of the results if you were to include people who already had the infection.
Yeah. And just to clarify, people who are immune are people who we suspect cannot get the infection because their body is protecting them because they've already had it. So like having chickenpox or measles, we don't expect you to get it again. We call you immune. Yeah. So what about, I have a question from an eager person who says, how can she be among the first people to be in the study?
Well, you're too late already to be the first. Sorry. Nationwide, at least, there's 89 sites that are doing the trial in the US. About 2/3 of them have already been activated and are enrolling. So there's already over 6,000 people who have been enrolled in the study. We started enrolling here at GW this past week. But if you were to be included, say next week, you'd still be among the first couple dozen. So there are ways of contacting us to get put on the list, and we would go through, a little questionnaire. We have an email address that's COVID-19 vax trial at gwu.edu. That's vax with an X. You can go to our website, just Google GW Vaccine Research Unit, and you'll see how you can answer a little questionnaire to give up your details so we can contact you. And then there is actually a national registry too. You can sign up and they match us via your zip code, and that's called Coronavirus Prevention Network coronaviruspreventionnetwork.org. If you go there, you can also sign up in the national registry. So there are multiple ways that we can get put into contact for you to come in and participate in the trial.
Okay. We also have a group of questions that really fall under the umbrella of process. So if I'm enrolled in a vaccine trial, what's actually happening? And is it just one dose or multiple doses? Do you come to my house? Do I have to come to you? Just give us the overview of what happens if you're in a trial.
Sure. So it's different depending on the trial. For the trial we're doing, the Moderna vaccine, the mRNA vaccine, it's 2 injections separated by a month. And currently, we got started doing our vaccinations here at GW in Foggy Bottom in DC at our normal clinical trial clinic. So you would come in and we can screen you, do the consenting, screen, and actually enroll you and give the first dose all in one visit. And that takes about 2 hours. And then we'd see you again in a month. And it's actually only a series of 4 in-person visits after that second injection over the space of 2 years. Mostly we're going to be doing telemedicine and phone call check-ins, as well as people have to complete an e-diary every day for 7 days after the vaccine, and then on a weekly basis. And that's going to trigger, we'll be notified if there's any symptoms that develop in our participants that might indicate they are developing COVID, because we then would want to either go out to them, we are going to try to be able to go out to people's homes, or bring them to our testing center here in Foggy Bottom to get the test for COVID.
Okay.
There might have been part of that I forgot to answer. I can't remember.
Yeah, well, that sounds pretty good. I think the thing is, there's so much confusion about trials, and there's also a lot of stigma and skepticism around trials. And I think just helping people understand what's really going on, if they sign up for a trial, what's happening, more information about it is just really helpful.
Sure, and I remember what I was going to say now is that although we initially started by doing the visits, in person down here at GW, we are going to start we have a mobile clinic to go out to different parts of the city to be able to actually do visits in people's communities rather than having everyone come down here necessarily. So that's going to be over the next couple of weeks, we'll be expanding to be able to do kind of satellite visits. So not everyone will have, because there people are concerned about getting on public transit. Parking isn't always easy around here either. So we're trying to be as flexible as possible to also bring the trial to people and other communities in our region. Go ahead.
And I love that, because as you may know, I am very much a champion for health equity and making sure people from all walks of life and incomes, backgrounds have the same access. And historically, I think one of the challenges has been, in order to participate, people have to come to you. And I love this notion that you all have decided to take this also into the community, recognizing that you have to be available to people, making it more convenient. So this is related to a question I got on Facebook, and I better read it to make sure I get it right. Is there a confidence that enough people of color with underlying conditions or comorbidities, those are other health conditions, have participated in clinical trials to ensure effectiveness? So she wants to know, for those who might be a little confused by my question, is are there going to be enough Black and brown people, the people we see dying from COVID, basically, people who are older, people who are Black and brown, people who have chronic health conditions like heart disease, diabetes, overweight, and obesity. Those are the people who seem to be suffering the most. And she wants to know if she can be assured that enough of those people will be in the trial so that we know it works for them.
That is a huge concern of ours, and we are very, very aware that we need to do a good job and a better job than has been done for clinical trials in the past in this country to ensure that we have a representative and diverse population in our trial. So that's why we're trying to get the word out as much as possible in as many different channels and ways that we can, that we're doing this. And that is the main reason we're doing the mobile clinics too, is so that we can, again, go out into other communities, not necessarily just, here in Northwest DC. You're right, this has been a pandemic that has disproportionately affected communities of color, especially those with comorbidities, with other medical conditions. such as high blood pressure, heart disease, and so on. So we are definitely making every effort to include people from communities of color and especially older individuals as well. So that's why we're trying to, our community, our mobile clinic can go out to, like, say, churches and, park in the parking lot. So we're already trying to make arrangements like that and partner with community organizations to be able to get the word out and also help us to conduct visits other than just here in Foggy Bottom. We're partnering with the School of Public Health here at GW, which has a lot of background and experience in partnering with different communities. So that's another way that we're trying to ensure that we have a good representative number of people in our study population.
So
I would say,
go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I would say that we have heard quite a bit of hesitancy from people from communities of color because of what's happened in the past, which has been horrible. Things like Tuskegee in the 60s and 70s even, that have caused people not to trust the clinical trial world and medical profession, for understandable reasons. So the only thing we can try to do is to be as transparent as possible in what we're doing, what the results have been to date, and to make sure that it's open, the trial is open to everyone.
Yeah, I appreciate those efforts a lot. A few years ago, I was invited to come to NIH to provide some recommendations around how you can increase the enrollment of Black and Brown people in trials. And in addition to saying the trial sites need to come to people or even set up a trial site, I also emphasize the importance of vaccine literacy, health literacy in general, helping people understand what this is about and whether or not it's harmful. I think without that trust that's linked to the education, it will continue to be very difficult. So I'd love to hear, do you all also have some educational efforts planned? Because I think it can't just be GW or any other academic center coming into these communities to say, hi, we're here, be in the vaccine trial. I think there has to be work done ahead of time, focused on community trust building and education. So what are your thoughts about that? And what are you doing in this area?
Point well taken. And that's primarily why we partnered with investigators and researchers at the School of Public Health. Me personally, my background, as I mentioned, is doing vaccine development for infections, tropical infections. So this is a bit of a pivot for me. I mean, I'm used to working in underserved communities overseas. We have a field site in Brazil. I've been working in for over 15 years and doing some studies in Africa. So it is a pivot for me to be doing this in the DC area. But because of my vaccine trial experience, it's kind of a natural progression. But that local community outreach, health literacy, education is not my background. So that's why I'm not about to all of a sudden become an expert in, the space of a month. And we're working with people like Dr. Magnus, Dr. Kuhl at the School of Public Health, who have been doing this, and talking to people like you who are well known for your health literacy work in the community. So that's going to be part of our efforts to go out to the community, as you say, not just show up and say, hey, be part of this study. But we have to also have the educational component. That's part of our partnership with the School of Public Health.
Okay, well, I have a fun question for you here. This is a friend of mine. It's the reason I'm laughing. He's saying, will there be billions of doses for everyone, or will it be every man for himself?
Well, I'm hoping it won't be every person for themselves. So the plans that, and I'm not part of this planning or effort. I say I'm just a peon doing, the trial here at GW. But the planning that I know of to date is to have 300 million doses of the different vaccines. So not just the Moderna vaccine, but to have 300 million doses available by second quarter or mid next year. So 300 million dose or courses of vaccination. So for example, the Moderna vaccine is actually 2 doses. So 300 million, to be able to fully vaccinate 300 million people. So that would obviously cover the US, but not the world. To be able to really cover the world's population with an effective vaccine is going to take partnership with other countries, or at least involvement of other countries, and potentially vaccines that have been developed in other countries as well. But for the US, that's the current plan. And who is going to be prioritized once we do have an effective vaccine? Again, that's not my decision, and I'm not involved in that planning. But there are lots of talks going on as to how it will be distributed, and that planning is already taking place now, including making the investments in order to get the vaccine out to different communities across the nation, so that it can be quickly ramped up and given to people. My thinking is that it's probably going to be prioritized for those who are most at risk of getting severe disease and potentially dying of the infection, which would be older people, people with other underlying medical conditions, and so on.
So you said that's not your decision. Whose decision is it? Because we need to have that person on here too.
That would be the CDC, federal government. They're the ones who are funding all of this. So they're making the investments to manufacture all the doses of vaccine even before we have any idea if they work, so that they'll be ready if we do show that they work, which hopefully they will. But traditionally that's been the CDC, the Centers of Disease Control, NIH, and the part of the federal government that's responsible for vaccines.
Yeah, okay. A question about whether or not you're seeing a different response depending on the population. So for instance, are you seeing older people versus younger people respond differently versus people who might have a chronic condition versus a healthy person? Do you have enough information yet? I know it's early, but I think it's a great question.
No, that's an excellent question. We do have, I can say, some initial data that shows that based on age. So I can't say anything about coexisting medical conditions yet because it's too early to know that. But at least we know that older people, so over the age of 70, when you look at the side effects, they tended to have, at least in the data that I've seen, they have less severe side effects in terms of the soreness and pain at the injection site. So it seems that younger people, and we've seen this with other vaccines too, but for the immune response, it looks like everyone responds regardless of age. So it doesn't seem like older people have a poorer or lower immune response, which is good news.
And the people with chronic health conditions also have a good response?
Yeah, I can't say that yet because they were not included in the phase 1 and phase 2 trials. So we'll only know that from the phase 3 trial, and it's too early to say that. We don't have any data yet from the phase 3.
Yeah. When do you think you might have data on those questions?
So the earliest, this is a guess, because it depends entirely on how many cases, COVID infection cases, are actually recorded in the 30,000 people who are going to be enrolled. But if the pandemic gets a lot worse than it is now, we might actually get an answer relatively quickly, even by the end of this year. Because if we have a bunch of cases in our study participants nationwide, they're built-in checks along the way. We call them interim analyses, but it's basically like little peeks at the data along the way. And if it looks like all of the cases of COVID were in people who got the placebo, that's one thing we actually didn't talk about, is that half of the people actually are getting the vaccine and half of them are going to be getting a saline salt water placebo injection. That's obviously not going to protect. So if it looks like all of the COVID cases are in people who got the placebo and there's none in the people who got the vaccine, they can say it works, like doing the statistics on it early. That says, even potentially by the end of the year, we might have an answer to the question.
Yeah, great. I have a question here about the Russia vaccine. I don't know if you can talk about it, or if you know much about it, but the question is it legit? So first of all, what is he asking about? What is this deal with the Russia vaccine? And if there is such a thing, is it legit?
Well, it exists. So there is a Russia vaccine. And in the news this past week, they all claim that they're going to approve it and give it to millions of people. But this is before they've done the usual testing. So as far as I know, the only testing that's been done so far is a phase 1 trial. So that very first...
Can I interrupt you to clarify? Did you say Russia has a vaccine, but they haven't tested it and they're giving it to people anyway?
Yeah, they've done initial phase 1 from what I know, but they have not done a phase 3 trial to see if it works. It doesn't seem that they've vaccinated a lot of people to see if it's safe either, from what I understand, from what I've read, but I've only read probably what everyone else has. So we know very little about the vaccine, whether or not it's going to work. Well, they're moving ahead anyways, and they're just assuming it will, and going to vaccinate a bunch of people. So that's risky to make that investment and make all those vaccines, but it's also risky, I think, from a safety point of view. There could be side effects. There could be worsened disease or infection if you actually get exposed to the virus, and it might not work. So people might think that they're protected and stop wearing masks, stop the physical distancing, and actually that may put them at increased risk as well if it doesn't work. So there's lots of things I think they shouldn't be doing that they seem to be doing.
Yeah, okay. Someone wants to know if you're aware of whether or not there's a system in place to distribute the vaccine once it becomes available.
Sure. So the system is the same system as giving the flu shot. So it would be going to your healthcare provider, pharmacy, so on. So there's, as far as I know, there's no additional plans beyond using the usual distribution network that we use to, say, get the flu shot out to everyone every year. So it's just going to be utilizing the same system, just with an additional vaccine, from what I understand.
Okay, and to add a bit of levity, the last question I have for you from Facebook is, do you party?
Not now. First of all, there's no time, and second of all, we're supposed to be socially distancing anyways.
Good answer. Okay, well, you've been very generous today with your time and information. And do you have anything else you want to add? Something we didn't cover?
I don't think so. We want people to participate. We want as many people as possible who are interested in the study to be able to participate. So we're going to do our best to open it up to everyone.
Okay, great. And for those of you who either are watching this live or will watch it later, Doctor, can you give them your contact information or the place they can go to get information if they have questions after this broadcast?
Sure. So you can email me. I'd be happy to answer any questions. You can find my email if you just Google me at GW. It's on the faculty webpage. But if you're interested in being a participant in the trial, I suggest you either go to our website, GW Vaccine Research Unit. You can just Google that. You can call 202-994-0047. Or, as I mentioned, go go to the National Registry, coronaviruspreventionnetwork.org. Any of those, or email us at COVID-19vaxtrial@gwu.edu to get into contact with us.
Okay, thank you so much. It was great to have you here today. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it too.